Today I will talk about discrete Laplace operator estimation for dynamic 3D reconstruction. My name is Xiangyu Xu and my advisor is Eric Dan. The outline is, first I will introduce three related work about 3D dynamic, dynamic 3D reconstruction. Also, second part is our own work. And the first one is I'm going to introduce the dynamic 3D reconstruction problem. This problem is trying to recover the 3D structure of dynamic objects which are observed by multiple independent image streams, which means the out camera going to be unsynchronized, and basically for each frame it can only observed by one camera, so you cannot use the usually triangulation way to reconstruct. Also, sometimes you don't know exactly the sequence information. The first paper is called Generic Trajectory Prior for Non-Rigid Reconstruction. First, they introduced trajectory basis way in the previous work, and then the general trajectory prior way. Then he analyzed the reconstructability. Then he introduced trying to reconstruct with some called high-pass filters. First, this is using trajectory basis reconstruction way. First is their definition for the projection called system of projection. Basically, they transfer the projection equation into an inhomogeneous equation for structure X. Then they can directly minimize this function to penalize the projection error, and then they trying to present the structure X by trajectory basis. Here the set is the basis trajectory basis, and is alpha is the coefficients for the to represent the X based on the trajectory basis, and then with know the X based on the experiment of the trajectory basis, trying to minimize the projection error in the previous equation, and by minimize in here the only unknown is the coefficients. So based on minimize this question, he trying to reconstruct the structure. Then they trying to reform the previous work into this generic trajectory prior. First, he introduced this since the non-space for the trajectory basis, since the X is based on the linear combination of the trajectory basis, so it's supposed to have non-value project into this null space for the trajectory basis. So then he reformed the cost function into this, trying to minimize the structure in this null space for the trajectory basis, and which subject to the projection. Finally, he reformed the equation into a quadratic form of X, which this norm I'm is exactly the quadratic form for the X, and M is the null space of trajectory product the transform of it. The goal they reform this is trying to analyze the reconstructability. In this, he suppose there is a random solution for the projection system, and there will be a null space for the Q, and with this solution plus some value in this null space, it still will be a solution for this system of projection, since this part product Q supposed to be 0 and it still will satisfy this function. Then he take this equation into the cost function, which is, and then he suppose the x prime, since it can be any solution to the projection function, so then he suppose it's the ground truth x. Then in this function, the only variable is the z, which is the component in the null space of the Q. So in this function, it's basically minimize the cost function for the z, and we can since this is a quadratic function, we can take the derivative of it and find the value. Take the derivative of this equal to 0 and find the z, which is in this form. And this actually is the reconstruction error. The norm of it is the reconstruction error. And he trying to solve this. Here he set the upper bound for this. And the solution for this supposed to he used a way of called perturbed solution for the system of this linear equation, and based on the concept, this value will mainly depends on this condition number, which in here is the gain, and here and this value depends on the cameras and the prayers, and the null space Q and the null space of M, if they intersect a lot, then this value will be will be a very big value. This will be like the reconstruction error is unbounded, and which here the M is about the null. It's actually related to the null space of the Q, which is the trajectory basis. So his null space actually is something related to the space of the trajectory basis. So in their concept is when the number of the bases increase, they're more possible have bigger intersect between the null space of Q and the null space of the M. And then they do some experiment. You can see in this graph, the conclusion is well, k is too small. It's partly to represent the basis. The track is partly to represent the trajectory by this basis. But if k is too large, the system is U conditional, which is analyzed before. You can see this k is 64. You have a very large reconstruction error. Then he used some adaptive strategy to choose k, which is like find the max k that make this again condition number smaller to some threshold, And he compared with another sparse coding method, trying to penalizing the norm of the coefficient, make like each make the track represented by a smaller number of bases, and he showed their method is at least as effective as the sparse coding approach. And then they use some high-pass filter to replace the track bases. Here, the M is replaced by the product of the high-pass filter. It will equivalent to like directly implement this high filter matrix to the structure. Sorry. And they use two kind of high-pass with here is the -1,1 and -2, -1. This two, the -1,1 is equal to like parallelizing the distance between neighboring frames, and the second is the second derivative of the frame, like actually the first one is trying to parallelize you represent the first derivative, and second one is the second derivative, and they do experiment to show this high-pass filter get better result than the track basis. And they do some experiment to show, compare them. But this is, in their word, is don't have ground truth, so they just show this trajectory and didn't say which one is good or not, actually. Here is the second paper, which is called Special Temporal Bundle Adjustment for Dynamic 3D Reconstruction. They trying to actually gently solve all the parameters 3D local of static points, relative temporal alignment, 3D trajectory of dynamic points. And the main idea is use some kind of physics-based motion per error for dynamic trajectory, and they use an incremental method to reconstruction and optimize the alignment. Their cost function is a combination of two parts. First is actually the reprojection error. Here the V is like binary, is like if the point is visibility, it's 1, and if it's not, it's 0. And second is kind of location uncertainty, which they also have a second part, which is the a cost function based on the time alignment. And this they use this least connect motion per area. Basically, basically is the is some physics concept, the m plus the square of the speed or velocity, and they approximate the speed based on some finite distance between the neighboring frame. Then they optimize this function by some linear optimization method called Levenberg-Marquardt algorithm. First, they do some experiment about their motion carrier, how this work for the time offset. He trying to assembling two sequence from a camera with different start time, and trying to sample this time offset from 0.1 to 0.9, and add some Gaussian noise, and trying to optimize based on these three different kind of motion parameters. You can see least kinetic and energy and the least force have basically the same result, and they work very well with when noise is low, and when noise is bigger, it feels for some short time offset. Actually, the best is when the time offset is about 0.5, like this. The frame is between the frame between the two frames, because the frame is 2.5. And this least action is actually give a really bad result even the noise is 0. Not really bad actually. Yeah, that's then he for the following experiment they all use the least kinetic energy. Here is their incremental method for this optimization strategy for their special temporal bundle adjustment. First, they're gonna initialize all those value, use some geometry triangulation based method. Second step, they try to refine those temporal alignment, and between the pairwise all pair of between all pair of cameras. They use this linear search, like a search on a discrete set of time offset between these two cameras, and for each time set, he trying to optimize function only for the 3D trajectory, and he choose the offset with lowest cost, and then set this offset, then keep this offset value. And then they trying to find the ordering of processed camera. Because this is incremental method, he need to add camera one by one. He trying to find this ordering to add the camera, and they see the camera, each camera as a node in a tree, and use this minimal spanning tree method. And the weight is based on the function in the right. Basically, this T is the pairwise time offset between cameras, and this Ij is the cost between this when this camera is aligned together, and this N is the number of corresponding points, and B is the distance of the baseline. And after compute this ordering based on minimal span tree, he trying to add the camera one by one based on this ordering, and to add this next camera, he will try to insert in this new camera in all the time slot among the camera already be processed, and for each slot he gonna estimate the time offset and 3D trajectory of only these two values set optimized for these two values. And one point is he gonna drop the result if this time offset gonna change the ordering of the camera. And after process all the camera, he will trying to find the time offset with the minimal cost. I need to click. And after process this, he finally optimize this cost function for all the parameters without changing the ordering of the camera. And last, he used called DCT resampling. For now, I cannot understand this. He really didn't say this clear. This equation, I cannot understand how this works. So I'm gonna skip this part. Maybe I can try to understand this later, or maybe just drop this part. It just they call the post processing. And they do some experiment. First, this is about the reconstruction error for DCT and this motion prior. Their reconstruction error will concentrate on a lower value compared to triangulation. And second is the time offset. And below is also the reconstruction error, and you can see the dynamic scene, especially the dynamic scene for after the motion prior, and the after 5. Actually, they have a pseudocode for the algorithm, but this after 5 is actually after using optimize the cost function globally for all the value, and then using the DCT resampling. Here he do some experiment on the handle cameras and show the reconstruction error. This is a checkboard. He recognized all those black part and trying to reconstruct those points. And you can see the frame levels. Triangulation, the arrow is concentrated on this arrow more than 71, and for the DCT, the best is concentrated on lower value. And then he do some other motion. This is a jump scene motion, and in this show, he trying to show compare using motion prior on 13 frame per second, and for this geometry based, he said this part is a fast motion, and for the geometry based motion, it will fail to reconstruct on this fast motion. And also he compared the last two figures. The motion prior using lower frame rate will have as good as result. For the jumps based at 120 frame rates. Okay, then this is the self-expressed dictionary learning for dynamic 3D reconstruction. The motivation is dynamic shape have the temporal coherence, and the 3D structure also can be approximated by the linear combination of the neighboring frame. Here is the principle. Like the structure will vary related to the previous frame and the next frame, and can be approximate the linear combination of these two frames. So the weights this is a column of the weights. So they will force the one corresponding itself to be 0, since you cannot you shouldn't express by yourself. Ideally, you have value on the two neighboring frames, and the other is 0. Here is their optimization functions. The first is trying to penalizing this difference between structure and self-expressed structure. And this will be a biconvex function to optimize. First, he will fix the x. The x get from some triangulation-based method, and do this sparse coding to find the coefficient width, to find the weights, and fix the weights to do the dictionary learning update to find the x. And the second term is the coefficient relationship. We suppose the width is very close to it's close to the symmetric, since the frames express u should be expressed by u. So this value is supposed symmetric in position. So they take this term to penalize the symmetric, trying to make it close to symmetric. And the third term is trying to penalize the distance between the neighboring frame in the same camera, since the sequencing in the same camera is known. Then he do some experiment on the motion capture date. This motion capture date is in 120 frame per second. They're trying to downsampling into 4 cameras. So each camera is about and make the radio unsynchronized. And so for each camera is 13 frames per second. And he trying to do experiment in different conditions. First, with different frame rate. You can see with lower frame rate, when the frame rate is very low, the reconstruction have a worse result. And for noise, he adds some Gaussian noise on the to the observation. You can see when noise is big, their reconstruction is total field. And second is with different percent of missing points, with maybe occlusion, definitely cannot observe. Then this is some result for the real dataset. And here is our method called discrete Laplace operator estimation for dynamic 3D reconstruction. We reconstruct the structure by minimizing the second differential and the first differential of the motion in terms of discrete Laplace operator. Also, we trying to use a method to recover global sequencing information through a combination of dynamic time wrapping and spectral analysis of the 3D motion. Use too much time. Our motivation is the dynamic 3D structure have the adjacent information. And inverse, based on the adjacent information, we can build this direct discrete Laplace operator and trying to reconstruct 3D shape by this. The principle here is we see the 3D structure as a weighted directed graph, which each frame 3D shape is a node, and the edge is one that point from it to the adjacent frames, which definitely ideally is his neighboring two frames. The weight on each edge is the corresponding adjacent value. Here, for directed graph, the Laplacian of the out is Laplacian out, which means out from based on the out degree. Here the A is adjacent matrix, which each column, the value in each column is the adjacent value for each frame to this frame, and the D out is a diagonal matrix. Each value actually is the sum of the row of the adjacent matrix. And we trying to reform this in this DL plus identical matrix minus this width. Actually, you can see since each row of the A is sum of each row is the D out. So when we take this D out, actually each of the rows of the width is summed to 1. So it becomes something actually exactly the width in the self-express method. Then we're trying to see how this how this relation. First, for the high pass filter is some kind of Laplace operator, but to set the adjacent value constant to 1. So each adjacent value is 1. So that's how they have this form. So for each frame they have 2 neighboring frame. So the d out is supposed to be 2, and 2 minus their adjacent value is in this form. And for self-expressed width, it's a Laplacian. It's a Laplacian that all the d out degree for each frame is constant, which is 1. So that's their the out degree is this identical matrix, but our Laplacian operator matrix, with the d out, the out degree is depend on the adjacent relationship. You can see it as a weighted self-expressed matrix. Here is our optimization cost function. There are 2 parts. First is represent the second differential, and the second part is the first differential. The first part can in the form of this is cost function minimized for x with and d out, and for the D matrix you only have value on diagonal, and actually the important for D out is only the proportion value for each value. So we can set the sum of diagonal to a constant value. In here we set it to 1. So finally, this is a triple convex function. We can use this alternative convex search to solve it. And second part is called it's our definition for the quadratic Laplacian form for the multi-dimension directed graph. Here the most simple quadratic form is for the undirected graph. It's in the form of XLX, and it means trying to parallelize the distance between each neighboring frames. Like the nodes have edges between them. In our method, we take into this in-degree Laplacian, which is the for the in-degree matrix, each value is actually the sum of the edges that point to this frame. So the delta is point out, this is point in, and so finally, this Laplacian quadratic form is equally to parallelizing the distance between the frame that it adjaces to this frame, which is point out, and also the frame that's see the frame as a adjacent frame, which point in this frame. This is a little bit confusing. And finally, we're trying to parallelizing the adjacent frame, and this also is in the form of a cost function for x with and d out. So finally, our cost function is a triple convex function for x with and d. So we use the alternatively convex search to automate this. It's like for each time fix the other two variables and optimize the other one. And during the optimization, we will fix for initialize x, use some triangular base, and set the d out all the same for each value. Then optimize width. Then second step, optimize the d out with x and width fix. Finally, optimize x based on width and d, then until it's to some threshold. We do some experiment on the motion capture date. Like the experiment in the self-express, we're trying to do similarly in the motion capture date. Each time only one camera can observe a frame, which means it unsynchronized. So then we compare with the self-express method. First show we have big advantage when the frame rate is lower. For self-express have a very big error, and we have better reconstruction, and we have at least as good as their in the condition with different level noise, and actually a little bit better. And when there is a lot of missing points, our must have a lower reconstruction error. And most important is we're trying to randomly drop some frame during the sequence, which make the equivalently to make the all degree for each frame difference. Like some point, maybe the neighboring frame is far away from it. And for self-express, it will optimize the self-express error minimization, this penalization equally for each frame. But we have this use this all degree to weighted those frames. So we have we basically same for dropping frames, and for self-express they have big error. And finally, we do some real data experiment. We use this Panoptic Studio from CMU. They have multiple synchronized camera. They have also in their dataset they have 2D observation and a 3D structure, which is computed by their method, which is using synchronized videos. Then we trying to downsampling the 3D structure into 4 camera and make them asynchronized, which means we use less camera and lower frame rate and asynchronous camera to reconstruct and compare their result use synchronized video. And you can see from the video these two motion is very close, and actually the mean distance between the joints is only 0.3 centimeters. It's very close. And from the right is like this 4 image actually is captured on 4 cameras at the same time. And in our experiment, we can only observe this one in this angle. From this angle, we cannot see part of the foot, the leg, but we can still reconstruct this missing point based on our method. Show our robust on the missing bit. This is another part to introduce our method for recovering global sequence. We see this the problem of recovering global sequence from structure as a dimension reduction problem. We see the 3-star as a high dimension date, and trying to reduce it into one dimension by preserving the pairwise relation. Then we can simply get ordering by sort this one dimension date. We use two dimension reduction problem method. One is spectral ranking with preserved pairwise similarity. Another is called multi-dimension scaling with preserved pairwise distance. The pairwise distance is the key point for this, since the most simple way is using Euclidean distance. It's good when the motion is close to linear, but for some nonlinear motion or some repeating motion, the Euclidean distance cannot perfectly represent the pairwise relation. Some motion, some frame may be far away in time, but actually very close in the space. So we are trying to compute the distance that along the trajectory, which we call arc distance. Is first this arc distance between the same camera is easy, since we already know the sequencing. You can directly take this accumulate distance as a approximation for the arc distance. And for the frame in the different cameras, first we're gonna use a mass dynamic dynamic camera wrapping to find the related position between these two cameras of each frame. So when you compute the arc distance in the frame in two different cameras, you, like in the second graph, you know the relative position, then you can find the arc distance in this way. Finally, we do some experiment on the motion capture data. We use some baseline method, which is called shortest Hamiltonian path, which is find a path throughout frames and distance and the shortest distance, and have the shortest distance. We also compare with the X initial, which is the triangulation-based method, with the X of the optimization, show that all structures have better sequencing information. First, for linear motion, all those method structure can compute have a good sequencing information. For nonlinear motion, using arc distance of spectral and MDS to have the perfect sequencing information. And for repeating motion, you can see, except using arc distance with the spectral and MDS, the other all failed to compute a good ordering. For information, this value is computed by some called Cadel rank correlation. He computed the correlation of ordering compared to the ground truth. Then this shows actually our method is work better in the condition of nonlinear motion and repeating motion. And finally, we're trying to use this to improve our structure in those extreme conditions, in this sparse and repeating motion. when we optimize width, when x and sorry, this will be d out fixed, our Laplacian quadratum actually is optimized based on this pairwise distance. And like what we said, this Euclidean distance is bad represent the ordering the sequencing information. So we're trying to replace the x with the f, which is the one dimension date computed from our sequencing by our method to compute the sequencing information. So this will better present the sequencing information. So in this graph, this is a very sparse and repeating motion, like people waving hands. And for self-express, you fail to reconstruct, and you can see the width is really a mess. And for our problem, still using this Euclidean distance, you cannot have a perfect reconstruction. Then we implement this f in the in this part, so you can see we have a much better structure, and width have it much sparse and we're more close to the ground truth width. In there, ground truth width is present by its better present by its shows its neighboring frames. So this can help to reconstruct. So here is some future work. Actually, this part is still need some improvement. We are working on the analysis of the reconstructability, and also we will do more experiment on the real data set.